Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host. So I'm here in the passenger seat. We're here in Mobile, Alabama, and I wanted to share a couple of updates with you. But before we do that, I want to talk about Mobile and some famous people and interesting things that happened down here in Lower Alabama. LA is one of my friends used to call it. Where you're from? LA, Lower Alabama. Um, so let's talk about famous people for a second. Probably certainly one of the top, I don't know, 10 greatest baseball players ever. Henry Aaron is from Mobile, and just great player, great man, great ambassador for the game, just a class guy. Passed away, I don't know, a couple of years ago, I think. But just, I remember when he was chasing Babe Ruth's record, and he played for the Braves, and I remember the news talking about the death threats that he was getting just because he was going to break a white guy's home run record. And he just like Jackie Robinson, he conducted himself with a lot of class and a lot of courage. So anyway, just shout out to the great Henry Aaron. And by the way, we just passed a sign for Hank Aaron Stadium. Another interesting thing about Mobile is I wanted to talk about another, some people, but what happened here. So in 1864, Mobile, in July and August 1864, Mobile was the last major southern port that the Union had not blockaded. And so the South was still able to conduct international commerce and get stuff in from foreign countries, which included weapons, etc., that they were buying from other countries. And so the Union force, naval force, with about a couple hundred soldiers on board under Admiral David Farragut, David Glasgow Farragut, Glasgow was his middle name. They came into Mobile Bay, and Farragut, in anticipation of the Tom Petty LP, Damn the Torpedoes, famously said, and by the way, torpedoes were what we would call mines now. They were called, but they were called torpedoes, and that "Damn the Torpedoes, full speed ahead," the saying that's attributed to Farragut, actually is kind of a paraphrase, but basically what he said was, he said, "Damn the torpedoes," and then he told a guy named Jewett, one of his subordinates, to proceed. And he also did order someone else to go at, as fast as they could. And what was happening is that the Confederates had mined an area that you couldn't quickly get past, and with torpedoes, with mines. So if you wanted to navigate through the mines, you would have to go slow. But in so doing, you would expose yourself to shore batteries that covered the approach and the entrance to Mobile Bay. So Farragut's strategy, though, was to simply run ships he had some ironclads, some monitors, and other ships through as fast as possible, with the idea that if you run them all through on the same course and the same track, that you're gonna, you might have ships get damaged or even sunk, but it's also clearing the torpedoes out of your way. And the Union Navy did have a ship that was put out of commission. But once they got through that gauntlet, there was only one Confederate monitor, the CSS Tennessee, that was able to fight them. Now the Tennessee took on a bunch of, Union Navy ships and acquitted herself well, but eventually was knocked out of commission and she had to be surrendered. And so Farragut, breaks the defenses of Mobile, and really that helped complete the Union blockade of the South. Now, here's why Farragut is really one of the most important people in U.S. Navy history, for many, many reasons. First of all, Farragut's family it was kind of interesting. Farragut became an orphan, and he was known to the family of David Porter. David Porter was a senior naval officer who had a son named David Dixon Porter. David Porter, when Farragut's mother died, took Farragut in as his adopted son. Well, David Dixon Porter was also the other, most famous kind of naval officer of the Civil War. So these two guys that were adoptive brothers really did incredible work. And Farragut was the first, Rear Admiral in the Navy, the first Vice Admiral in the Navy, U.S. Navy, and the first Admiral. And the second Rear Admiral, Vice Admiral, and Admiral in the U.S. Navy was David Dixon Porter, his adopted brother. So their legacy was incredible even at that point. But David Dixon Porter had a son who was a naval officer, but he had a grandson who was named David Dixon Porter II, who was a major general in the United States Marine Corps and is a Medal of Honor recipient. So that's a little background about the Battle of, that's my little riff starting off with Mobile and the great Henry Aaron. So we had a little, mechanical or electrical problem. And by the way, I was not rescued by anybody in a Peterbilt. I'll let you know that. So if you remember, I talked about my batteries and how they were kind of gassing when I pulled into Pittston it's been about 12 days ago now, or 13. But what happened was they were gassing. The mechanic at inbound said, "Hey, I think you should, you should go over to the shop and have these checked out." So I went over to the shop and had them checked out. I waited to get in the shop to do that. Well, then, the mechanic was like, "Yeah, they're fine. They're cold cranking amps. The CCA is, even for the worst battery, is still above the minimum." And I said, "Well, what about the smell?" Because when batteries are gassing, what it basically means is the electrolyte in them is boiling, right? That's where the steam comes from. That's where the smell comes from. He's like, "Well, I talked to the Freightliner representative, and he said that if, once they cool down, as long as they're not bulged or anything, once they cool down, they'll be fine." Well, a few days pass. I end up out in Salt Lake City, and I get my transmission service. I get an oil change, and I get an air filter on my air dryer. When they said, "Yeah, your truck's ready to go." So I go to start it up to back out of the bay in Salt Lake City, and it cranks over, but it doesn't start. So I stop, because because the starter gets really hot really fast, because I guess I need a gyroscopic lens on my camera. That's just a bridge. And so I don't like to crank it over and over, because that starter gets really hot really fast. So anyway, I stop, crank it over again, and same result. So then I was about to get out of the truck and just ask, okay, is there something I'm missing here? And one of the mechanics, not the guy that worked on my truck, but another mechanic, he gives me this, keep cranking it over. So I do, and it starts. But then after that, it just seemed like it started a little bit slower. Like, I don't know how to quantify it, but let's say you thought the engine fired up after a second of cranking, right? Well, then it seemed like it would take 2 seconds or 3 seconds of cranking, which is a long time. And it just kept getting worse. Well, we were out in Kansas, and it was warm, and we stopped to get fuel. Well, then I went to start the truck up, and it wouldn't start. It was just like, eh. So we turned the APU on, let it charge up, and it started. But my initial reaction was I was going to go to Springfield and get some new batteries, because when I was back in Pittston, I had told my wife, I'm like, yeah, I probably need new batteries. But when the guy was like, no, everything's fine, I was like, okay, I'm not going to buy something if I don't really need it. Even though in my mind I kind of was like, probably it's time. So we continued on that trip, and we dropped in North Carolina. Well, then, actually, Friday night we had picked up another load, and we stopped again. I actually just stopped to get a soda at Love's, and I was in between the pumps and couldn't get the truck started. So I let the APU run for quite a while. There weren't a lot of people around. Nothing. It was just still basically dead as a doornail. Like you could hear the Bendix engaging, but that on the starter, but that was about it. So I got a jump, but they didn't have anybody there that could replace my batteries. So I got a jump, and I was like, okay, I'll just go park at this rest area nearby and then come back in the morning. But no dice, even though the APU had run all overnight, and even though I didn't know if I needed permission, but I got permission from RA to try to jump the truck from the reefer battery. Now, for those of you that don't know, the reefer battery is on the right side of the reefer. It's in that right panel. So the easiest way to get to it is not on the catwalk. It's actually just to walk around and open it from the ground, and you can see the battery right there. My problem was I actually had possibly the worst possible, load cooling requirements that I could have for wanting to use the battery on the reefer to try to start a truck. And the reason was this: it was set at 70 degrees with a 7-degree variance. And had it been a dry load, I could have just started the reefer and put it on continuous for just a few minutes, right? It wouldn't have hurt anything. Had it been an empty trailer, I could have just turned the reefer on and run it. Had it been a load of ice cream, the reefer would have just been cranking because we were down in, Georgia, basically. But this load, the reefer seldom cycled. So I had the jumper cables on for, a couple hours, and I got up because I was just vegging. I got up and I was like, okay, the reefer is actually running, the APU's been running, let me try to start this. And I almost got it to catch. And then finally I was like, you know what, I don't want to sit around here any longer, because I was already loaded and I was already going to miss my drop time, or my appointment. So I'd already told dispatch that I wasn't going to make my 90 on time. So I called RA. The guy from Love's, which was just up the road, he came over, put 4 new batteries in it, and then we're back on the road. But anyway, so my message on this is simple. If your batteries start gassing, if you get out of the truck and you got that sulfur smell, that acid smell, whatever you want to call it. And by the way, when he pulled the batteries out, there was acid. It wasn't just gassing. It actually boiled over, and there was like electrolyte on top of at least one of the batteries. But if you get in that situation where they start smelling, where they're gassing because the electrolyte's heating up so much, just replace them. I regret not replacing them when we were in Pittston. I should have just said, you know what, they're gassing like that, they're done, right? I knew that I had been in very hot temperatures over 2 different summers actually. And you know, I was talking with my buddy Lyle yesterday, and he was basically like, yeah man, every 200,000 miles. So and by the way, I'm not sure if these batteries had ever been replaced. And 200,000 is a good benchmark, but I would say that even if you get to the point where you are so anyway, that's my story. I'm kind of sticking to it. Oh, another bridge. But yeah, so if those batteries are smelling, you should be replacing them. Anyway, take care, be safe, and we'll talk to you next time on Tim Travels.